Okay gang, in this video I'm going to teach you carburetor basics. Carburetor basics. Now this is the carburetor off of my Stihl MS250, and what you see here is you have an idle adjustment screw. Whenever you adjust this screw, what it does is it moves your butterfly slightly. So let me show you. You see that gap on the bottom? Well, whenever I turn this in, that gap is going to open up. See how it's opening up? That is allowing more fuel, or I'm sorry, more air to pass through. So a lot of people ask where that should be. Well, I mean, we can't really give you a good answer. Certain carbs require a larger gap and certain don't. That little hole at the bottom that you see, that's like a half a hole, right? That right there is, in theory, enough to allow air to flow, even if you got this thing all the way closed off. But basically what you're wanting to see is just almost completely closed. This right here is basically, it's hard to actually describe to people because whenever we're tuning these carburetors, you're going off of feel and sound, and so there's really no measurement there. Like I could tell you something like, oh, you should have like a 5/1000 air gap or something, but it would just be guessing. So that's why nobody really tells you what to set this butterfly at, because there's no real known quantity that we can tell you, or measurement. All right, so let's talk about the actual jets. All right, this right here is actually marked. Let's see, there you go. You might be able to see it down there. There's an L right there. There's a little L. And a lot of times this side will have an H, this one, but don't always expect there to be an L and an H. It's not always there. Let me see. But this one does have it. Low side and a high side. The best way to remember it, I find, is the low side is always on the side facing the cylinder and the intake and the actual engine. Your cylinder and piston and intake are on this side. That's your low. Your high side is right here. All right. Another way, if you take these out, you will always find that the low side is the longer of the two jets. Whoop. All right, now this one has a safety on it, right? A throttle, or I'm sorry, it's a limiter is what it is. So I'm going to try and take this out real quick. Take it off, I mean. When these are on, I've never taken one of these. Okay, this has a spring. What do you call these things? I can't remember. It's sort of like a cotter pin, but they're not. What do you call that? It's a spring something. Spring pin? I gotta get that out of there. There's our carb, and there's our two jets. Now, remember what I just told you about how the low jet is always the longer of the two jets? Not on an MS250. No, that's never seen that before. Never in all my days messing around with it. So I guess if you looked at just the tip here, you would be able to say that it is still the longer one, you know, but barely. Usually the low jet is much longer than the high jet. So with this little bit of knowledge, I should say, always make sure you know which one is the low jet and which one is the high jet, and keep them separated. All right. But basically these things, all they're doing is covering up a hole. That right there, that little tiny tip, is what's literally plunging into a hole. If you go all the way in, it closes it all the way off. Same thing with this one. If you go all the way out, it opens that hole all the way up and to flow maximum fuel. And now this, to the newcomer, sounds like, well, I mean, just turn it all the way out so you can have maximum fuel. Well, the ratio between fuel to air has to be spot on. And so if you go all the way out to deliver maximum fuel, you're going to be giving too much fuel in almost every single situation. So we have to tune it properly. But whenever you hear people say, fatten up the low side, what they're saying is turn the low side jet out to allow more fuel in. That is fattening it up, okay, on the low side. Same thing applies to the high side. Lefty-loosey, you turn it to the right, you get less flow. Turn it to the left, you get more flow. Same thing with your jets on the carburetor. So what we do here is we go ahead and we tighten it all the way down, but do not use any brute strength. Whenever it stops turning, like there we are, that's the seat. It is seated. Now I take it, half a turn, whole turn, and a quarter. 1 1/4. You know, some people do 1 turn out, some people do 1 1/2 turns out, but these are initial settings that you want to do, and this will work on every carburetor. All right, it'll get enough to where it'll fire off and do something, and then from there you use your knowledge to figure out what it's doing. Does it require more fuel or does it require less fuel? I believe that's seated on that one. Yeah, there we go. Same thing on this one. Half a turn, whole turn, quarter turn. So now I have removed my limiter. What's the point in removing the limiter? Simple. You're just wanting to make sure that you can adjust it. You have the maximum adjustment. All right. These limiters are for idiots. Now, that's not a knock. We have a lot of idiots. And so these things really work out well for in nearly every situation. They are going to help people out more than it hurts them, because most people have no clue what to do here. But with these limiters, you're typically either going to run too rich all the time or too lean all the time, because you just don't have very much adjustment, especially if you buy this saw brand new at, say, well, currently I'm in the Atlanta, Georgia area, and they set up the saw for you. If they're good and you know they actually do something, they really set it up and tune it well for you when you buy it at the dealership. But honestly, that's rare. They just fire it up and go and send it off. But let's say that they tuned it up really well for your area and you're good to go. Then that adjustment right there will probably be enough for the wintertime versus the summertime, or however, which way. But if you take this saw then and go to Denver, Colorado, well, you got a lot less air up there, so you need a lot less fuel. So you won't be able to turn it in as far as you need to. So that's why we remove the limiters, is just to give the maximum amount of tunability. All right, now initial setup of the carburetor. We have a small amount of airflow that can get around that butterfly. You guys can't really see it on the camera, but it is there. I can see it with my bare eyes. So you have a small amount there, and we got that by adjusting the idle screw. These are often marked with an I for idle. There we go. That's the way it is. That's the way it goes. So LA then. What that stands for, I don't effing know. I don't know what that stands for. Low air? I don't know. But anyways, you got your throttle, butterfly adjustment. You have your low side adjustment, which these two work in conjunction with each other. Normally, when you have this set right, and it's usually set right from the factory, you don't have to touch this. All of your idle is done with your low side. And then whenever you squeeze the trigger, this one takes over and starts flowing the main fuel. So this is your high side. So there you go, basic carburetor knowledge. We have our throttle butterfly, we have our choke butterfly. The point of choke is to cut off air so that we can rush a large amount of fuel into the cylinder whenever it's cold. That way that it will ignite off easier whenever the saw is cold. But then very quickly it starts, you know, it even tries to start, boom, you know, and you hear it wanting to turn over. You turn that choke off. But we've charged the cylinder with enough fuel at that point, then it should light off. Once it's up and running, you will have a high idle on most chainsaws, and so you have to throttle it, and that dies down the high idle, and then you're going to do your adjustment on this side right here. Once you get that figured out, then you go to how it's actually running and cutting under full throttle with the high side. All right, basic carb knowledge. This video is done.